Everybody, and welcome. I'm Terry Ryder, founder of hotspotting.com.au, and today we're going to explain why we think you should get ready for the 2023 resurgence in property markets. Now, to some observers, this may seem like a highly ambitious and perhaps unrealistic objective, given that the price data from some sources at least suggests widespread price decline is happening, and there's no shortage of economists wanting to predict further drops in property prices. And of course, interest rates keep rising. Well, the bottom line is I think the economists and many journalists have quite simply got it wrong. And so too does my special guest today, Danny Buxton, the managing director of the 000 Property Consultancy. Danny, welcome.
Thank you, Terry, and looking forward to our conversation today. As we discussed, we'd like it to be a conversation. And a big welcome to all those who are, watching this webinar, whether you're watching live or a recording of. Looking forward to talking about it because we do believe that now is a great time to be buying, despite what we may be hearing in the media. So looking forward to the opportunity.
Yeah, I certainly concur. I think it's 2023 to me is a time of opportunity for property investors from all sorts of respects, and we'll be talking through a lot of that today. I just encourage people out there watching and listening to give us your questions and your comments. You can do that by typing into the chat box or the Q&A panel, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. We'll deal with some of them as we work through that are pertinent to what Danny's talking about at the time, but mostly we will deal with questions and comments in the final 15 or 20 minutes of the hour. So, Danny, if you could perhaps share your screen, and we're going to talk through some material that you're going to present.
Will do. There we go. So, again, today we are talking about just the resurgence of what we see in 2023 and the opportunity that exists for those who want to invest in property. And obviously, just a quick definition of what resurgence really means, and an improvement, recovery, rebound, revitalisation, renewal. It goes on. Obviously, today is just really general information. It's a discussion. It's always important before you do anything that you seek independent advice, whether it be through your accountant, through your financiers, through those. I'm really big, and we'll talk about this at the end, of building your team of people around you who can work with you. And as always, that's something that we would love to be a part of. And we do have a special offer at the end of this presentation that we'd like to give to those who are involved and listening to this presentation. So a couple of topics that we're going to cover off on, which Terry and I discussed, is obviously just understanding media reports. And I know there's been a lot of, if you follow Terry, which I hope you do, and if you don't do, you'll see there's a lot of commentary around the media and understanding the market, and understand there are markets within markets and the data, and being able to look through that data. We are in a housing crisis, and we're going to talk about that and why now is it a good time to be buying.
I think by housing crisis, you mean a housing shortage crisis?
Well, we have a housing shortage crisis, both in rental, but also we've actually got a real supply and demand issue. So we're going to talk about that. And unfortunately, the housing crisis that we're seeing, particularly in the rental market, is not going to go away for some time soon. And there are a number of reasons that is happening. And where we see some of the markets, we're going to just touch on some of the markets that we're looking at. Everyone's different. We love it when we talk to clients and we're able to understand where they are and what they're trying to achieve and what their plan is, and then being able to go and identify the best place for them to go, rather than someone saying, I want to buy here, find me something here. It's to me, investing is all about making money and making an informed decision based on the research and the true data that's there to see you, grow in your future wealth creation. And then we're going to have a Q&A time as what we discussed. So obviously, Terry, we see a lot of stuff in the media. I know you cover off on this a lot. It just amazes me, the stuff I see and read. In one paper just the other day, I saw something about that the ocean levels are going to rise by 4 meters. And then at the same time to another article about the fact that the oceans are drying up and areas like Venice are having a massive issue where all their canals are and the sea levels are dropping. So again, it's all about clickbait and what sells. I don't know if you want to comment on that, but
I think it's what they think sells. I think they think that negative sensation sells. And what strikes me about Australian media, in days gone by, there used to be quality media and there used to be tabloid media, but now it's all tabloid. Even the formerly serious newspapers like the Financial Review and the Australian have gone tabloid. The ABC has gone tabloid. It's all about sensation and emotive language, and they're not too concerned about accuracy, fairness, balance, and providing good information for consumers. They just want us to click on stuff, and they don't care how much they scare us and alarm us. And I think people just need to be aware of the motivations that lead to the headlines we're seeing. And it's a long way divorced from reality in terms of what's really happening in property markets.
Oh, look, I think you spent a whole hour just talking about this. It just reminds me, and I've used the example here of, for some reason, where are we here? Of Chicken Licken. And I don't know if anyone remembers the story about Chicken Licken, believes the sky's falling down and it's coming to an end when an acorn falls on his head and decides to go tell the king. And to me, I think that's really the media in many ways is just creating this hysteria, as Chicken Licken did with the farm animals. I think there's a lot of people who are making decisions based on what they're reading in the media rather than actually looking at the actual data. A perfect example, Terry, I saw an article in our local press talking about Sunshine Coast property drops 11%. I thought, wow, I haven't actually seen that. And then look, there are areas, and not saying that property markets haven't softened in places, and in certain markets there's certainly been the case, but 11%. And then I actually looked at the data and where they actually got the information and realised I found where the data came from. It was actually talking about listings had dropped 11% from this time compared to last time, not values. But it was just a one-liner in there which would easily be missed in their article. And it was all about alluding to property values. So I think people just need to be really careful and understand where and who's actually writing that article and their experience.
And also the reality we find, Danny, every day, because every day we're delving into media, looking for information we can use to inform our research reports. And what we find happens to an alarming degree is that the headline doesn't actually reflect the content of the story. The headline will say something quite different to what the data on the story says. In other words, the headline's a lie to induce us to click on it. And it's amazing how many times that happens these days. But when you actually read the content of the article, you find that the information is not nearly as alarming as the headline would have us believe. And that's just one factor amongst many that consumers need to sift through and trying to understand what's really happening with property markets at the moment.
And I'm sure most of your listeners and those who subscribe to yourself and certainly our clients as well know that, I mean, anyone knows that the media is a lot of sensationalism there. And we saw this back in 2020. We saw this alarmism, we saw these headlines, we saw these things about property prices are going to drop by 40%. Now, I don't think we are in the same market as what we were as we went into when we first went into the pandemic, but there's a lot of similarities there with a lot of fear, FEAR, false evidence appearing real, and people just sitting on their hands and just waiting. And unfortunately, those people that will wait will miss out on opportunities that exist. And it also goes to that question where we often talk about in the media about one property market. And we know that there's not just one property market. There's geographical property markets. Southeast Queensland, you have slightly different markets, and even in a specific area, you also have what we call, and it's important for people to understand, we have vertical markets as well. And just in conversation with a number of our valuers locally here, and we talked about what we're seeing, and we are seeing there has been a softening, particularly in that middle market, in that, I don't know, 1.2, 1.5 to $2.5 million, where people have perhaps had a property in the lower end, have made some good money, have sold, and perhaps extended themselves a little bit more than they should. But interestingly enough, even in that case, most of those owner-occupiers just tighten their belt. We are seeing listings are still very, very low, which comes down to a supply issue, which I'll talk about a bit later. Your high-end property market, your $4 or $5 million plus stuff, it kind of on its own different trajectory at times. But it's your affordable, bottom quartile, that everyday house that is affordable. That market is a lot more resilient, and in fact, that's where we see great opportunity. We don't see that, and we're not seeing prices dropping in the areas that we're investing. In fact, if anything, and talking to one of our local valuers has actually seen, and they're reporting around about a 5% increase in just this quarter alone compared to last quarter, which was very flat.
Yeah. We're actually seeing more and more data, Danny, actually depicting growth in markets. The media tends to focus on figures from CoreLogic, but there are other reputable, credible sources out there, such as PropTrack, Domain, SQM Research, the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and they have different data, and it's alarming the degree to which data from different sources differs. So the latest data from domain.com.au, which is one of the big national property websites, as people will be aware, for the most recent quarter, it showed that house prices actually rose in 5 of the 8 capital cities in the most recent quarter. Then we have the latest data for January from SQM Research, and it had a similar finding that house prices rose in 5 out of the 8 capital cities, and apartment prices rose in 7 out of the 8 capital cities. So there's actually growth happening out there, and even CoreLogic data in the last few weeks, their weekly prices index has shown growth in the most recent week and the week before. So we're actually starting to see a trend emerging where we're starting to nudge back into growth as a generalisation around the country. But what those figures also show is there are markets that are rising while some are falling. And at the point you're making, we don't just have one market. We have different markets doing different things, and some of them are growth markets at the moment.
And it really is important for people to understand there are markets within markets, and then really to be able to make that informed decision based on the actual data. And it is hard because data will always be skewed. One of our favourite series or TV shows is West Wing, and I love one of the episodes is lies, and more statistics. and a lot of people can create data to say what they want. Look, at the end of the day, though, the property market is no different from any other market, with supply and demand forces having impact on property values. This is literally taken out of the recent monthly review by Hare and Todd White, and particularly from the Sunshine Coast, where they say the interesting thing about the current situation is typically any significant softening of values is normally accompanied by rising unemployment. Now, at the moment, we are near full employment, although we see a slight adjustment there. It is all a little bit confusing. And I think the most important thing is the underlying market drivers are still in play, with the lead indicator being that the rental market continues to be extremely tight. I don't know if you want to comment further on that, Terry, but...
Well, yeah, I think we're getting far too much commentary from economists about the real estate market. It's not their area of a specialty, and I think that economists collectively don't have a very great or deep understanding of real estate market dynamics. They tend to think that the only factor in play is what's happening with interest rates. You and I know that that's not the case. There are many other factors, and the reasons why we think that 2023 is going to be a year that shows growth and opportunity for investors is that some of the other factors that are in play will, I believe, overpower the interest rate factor and deliver growth in selected locations. I'm also interested in the comments from Hare and Todd White, because one of the problems consumer has, a lot of the commentary and a lot of the analysis, if you can call it analysis, comes from people with a vested interest in the message. I find that valuers are probably the most neutral people in the market. They're the people least likely to be talking a market up or down. They just tell it as they see it. I often say that valuers are too boring to be sensationalist. They're technicians who call it the way they see it at the coalface, and they're at the coalface every day. So I think if you really want to find out what's going on in the local market, talk to some of your local valuers. You'll get it straight. You won't get any hard sell like you might get from a selling agent. You'll just get the way they see it today, yesterday, last week in the market, because they're every day doing their jobs.
Yeah. You just mentioned interest rates just a moment ago, which is obviously the big elephant in the room for a lot of people. And we see a lot of commentary about interest rates is what's causing property prices to drop significantly. But again, when I do a lot of my reading too, if you look beyond that, we also see that people have bigger savings than they've ever had before. They've got a lot of people actually well and truly in advance of their repayments. We still see mortgage arrears at really all-time lows. Anything you want to just briefly comment on that, despite
the banks, the major lenders keep telling us that they're quite comfortable even in a rising interest rate environment because most of their customers, they say, are well ahead of their mortgage repayments. And only yesterday, because we're now in the reporting season, the banks are reporting the results. And yesterday, Bendigo and Adelaide Bank, which is the fifth biggest bank in the country after the big four banks, said the same thing, that the vast majority of their customers are actually ahead on their mortgage repayments and a significant proportion of 2 years ahead on their repayments. They used the lower interest rates period to pay extra and get ahead of their mortgage repayments. So they're comfortable in a higher interest rate environment. And that's the message that we are getting from lenders over and over again recently. So that's one of the factors that's keeping the market solid. The other thing is that the buffering system, when people are assessed for a mortgage, they're not assessed at current interest rates, they're assessed at current interest rates plus 3%. So most of the people who currently have mortgages were assessed at the higher interest rates. So they're comfortable.
Which means the servicing has been reduced to some extent as well for some people, which then puts further pressure on that more affordable property than it does, because the people who perhaps might have had a borrowing capacity of over $1 million or $1.4 million 6 months ago, their borrowing capacity is restricted a little bit with the servicing that the banks have put in play, which then creates a high demand in that lower end. Interestingly enough too, though, we are noticing that a lot of people, not only are they ahead, but they're also being a little bit more strategic moving forward in what they're wanting to do with their investment. And there's also a flow-on effect too here with rents. Obviously, we're in a very tight rental market. I've never personally, in 17 years doing what we do, and then being an investor before that, and even been back in the real estate industry back in the early 90s, I've never seen the rental market as tight as it is right now, not just in where I live, but in multiple markets across Australia.
Well, it's because it's never been as tight, Danny. I mean, all the data, I think the data providers all agree at that. This is the tightest rental market on record since they started keeping records on vacancy rates. Most postcodes in Australia are below 1% now, and it's just never been that tight before. I think the key message, and this is the most pertinent information for investors, is it's going to get worse from a tenant's viewpoint. That is, it's going to get tighter before it gets looser, because there is no solution in sight to the shortage, but there is extra demand coming into the market, big extra demand coming into the market for rentals. So it's rents are going to keep rising, yields are going to keep rising, and that's a great compensating factor for investors in an environment of rising interest rates.
And from a rental cost, look, it's no one wants to see people unable to find a place to live. Everyone should be able to have the right to be able to put a roof over their heads. But we are behind in government policy in this process. I think there's been this constant attack from certain groups to have a go at investors because they're rich, wealthy people who are trying to who are creating the increase in rents, but it is a supply and demand issue. We are seeing less people. We've seen a lot of people who, we saw a bit of a panic last year with we had this conversation back in July when we had our last webinar, and we were talking about the Queensland land tax. And we were both very adamant that it wasn't going to happen, but unfortunately people panicked with the media and what they were seeing, and a number of people sold their properties perhaps even below their true value. Now we're seeing there are some people who are reacting in a negative way, but interesting enough, those who are investors who are maximising their returns, who are selling their properties, they're not being bought by other investors, actually being bought by owner-occupiers. And so it's actually creating a shrinking rental market. And we need to be building more and creating more investment properties rather than attacking people who are trying to get ahead. Most people who invest, as you would know, are mum and dad investors. Will have one or two properties. And, we've got this thing called migration that's about to happen, or is starting to happen from external. We've got internal migration pressures, but as the borders, international borders are opening up and students coming back in, we've got a major issue on our hands. And it's, as you said, it's only going to get worse, and particularly here in Queensland, where if you look at the information that's put out, we're in Queensland receiving probably some of the biggest growth in that area.
Yeah.
So look, agree. I just think it's a major issue. Rents are not going up because of interest rates. That it's actually because of the demand and supply issues that we're seeing.
It doesn't matter how high. It really doesn't matter, Danny, how high interest rates go. Investor owners could not put up their rents just to compensate for higher costs. Only if the market will sustain it. If the supply-demand equation allows rates to rise. The mechanism by which rental rents are rising is mainly when you have an open house for a rare vacant property. There's a queue of people at the open house, and someone will offer more than the asking rent. That's a common factor around the country, and that's one of the mechanisms by which rents are rising.
Yeah, look, we're even noticing firsthand through our property management arm that a lot of the time we don't even have the opportunity to advertise a property because we've already got people who are lined up who are waiting for the next one to come up because they've missed out on a particular property. And so our days on market is again the lowest it's ever been. We're well below 1% in what we're doing. So I guess it comes to the question: is now a good time to be buying property? I'm always of the view it's always a good time to be buying property if you're smart and you're wise with where you go. And if you talk about why now, for me, the supply and demand issues are very, very strong, particularly in that lower quartile, in those more affordable properties. We've got real estate listings. If you are in a market where we're seeing prices that are falling and we're seeing this massive drop that some of the media like to portray, we would see a significant amount of properties hitting the market. That is not the case. We are still at very low listing rates. I think we are going back into a more normalised property market, but we've got decreased listings, which has created an issue with supply. We've got increased migration, which we talked about, which is increasing demand. As we've talked about, this rental crisis that we have. Interesting to note, and a lot of people probably don't notice this, but we also, I think there's a great opportunity right now where we can find vacant land that is registered or about to register, because land costs and the cost to build and create land for development, which we need because we have an undersupply of properties, is rising and is about to rise significantly because the cost of construction that we've seen in the building industry, when you're developing land, you're building. There's massive infrastructure that goes in underneath that block of land. Concrete, the amount of concrete and steel that goes into a land development is significant, and those costs are going to go up. And so we're already listening and talking to developers in future releases. Just their base cost has increased and will be reflected in pricing. We have some opportunities that we've been able to secure where we're seeing some land that is based on previous pricing that we're able to secure and present to our clients. There's an opportunity for buying below, or we're seeing that what we call that effortless advantage is a term that's coined by numerous people, where just getting that immediate uplift through developing that property, through building a property and putting that property there. The other issue too is there are people who are quite fearful about building because of what's going on in the building industry, which I'll talk about in a moment. But there's also, even though build costs have stabilised or what we think have stabilised. There are changes to legislation that is occurring in a lot of the areas to do with requirements for disability or providing the home to be more accessible for people. Change the legislation to do with changes to your energy efficiency and how that has been now to get a 7-star rating. All these other boxes now are required, which is then adding anywhere between 3 to 5% to the cost of a house. So if you've got a house, $300,000, $400,000 build, that can add $20,000 just in those changes to legislation. So we have our government all talking about building affordable properties, but then they're actually putting in legislation that's pushing the cost of the construction up.
And so, that's a never-ending story, isn't it, Danny? With government changes to the laws, they always add to the costs of new builds, and that's why we have a housing affordability problem in Australia fundamentally.
Yeah. So for us, obviously, as your viewers would know, we're very big on new property. That's what we do, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But there is real opportunity there, and we're seeing immediate uplift for some of our clients where we're able to buy what we call below. But again, property is always about the long term. But when you buy, it's very important that you get the right area and you're investing in the right place. A lot of people buy with emotion. They buy with their heart rather than buying with their head. And so there's a number of key indicators that you need to look at. And one of those places that we rely on significantly, not just talking to our local valuers or valuers in that area, but your reports, Terry, are based on factual information with no hidden agenda in that process. And so where now? For us, the factors don't change where we look. You've got to look at the demographics and the population growth. You've got to look at the economic and the employment growth, which obviously leads to wages and ability for people to afford property, both from a rental perspective and a purchasing perspective. Infrastructure. I don't know how many times we bang on about the infrastructure, but following that infrastructure growth, both private and government infrastructure. And again, obviously that's supply and demand. So you've got to look at those multiple growth drivers. And we all know what happens when those who invest, and I don't call it investing, I call it speculating in those economies where they don't have a single economy, for example, a mining or resource town. So for us, some areas that I've just picked here that we really like, Adelaide. We just think Adelaide still has a long way to go, and it's actually one of the strongest markets when you actually look at the real data that's coming through. And Terry, I'd love for you to comment on some of these places. Sunny Coast, Brisbane, obviously with the Olympics and what's happening there with over 7 billion. Well, they say 7 billion. I think that will blow out significantly. Gympie, Wide Bay, is often missed. I know, again, in a lot of your reports, you talk about Hervey Bay and Bundaberg. Cairns and Townsville, great opportunities. I don't know if you care to comment briefly on that, Terry.
Certainly, Queensland is very much top of mind for investors now that we've got rid of that land tax bogey that's been cast into history. People can feel a little bit more confident about investing in Queensland. A couple of crucial bits of data which point to Queensland. One is the population data. For the last 3 years, Queensland's been the population growth leader of the nation in terms of the states and territories, particularly last year. A lot of people have left the biggest cities, have been moving to smaller cities and to regions. A lot of that internal migration has gone to Queensland. Queensland's also getting growth from overseas migration and from natural increase. And it's in terms of population growth, it's Queensland first and daylight second. The other thing that stands out for me is we're always interested in what's going on in economies because we think that real estate markets are local in nature and they arise out of local economies. The latest State of the States report published by CommSec, which they do quarterly, they rank the 8 states and territory economies from 1 to 8 based on a series of metrics. Queensland, number 1 strongest economy in the nation. So you put that together with the population data, the lifestyle factors, the affordability factor. Many roads right now are leading investors to Queensland. And some of those locations you mentioned, highly favourable: Townsville, Bundaberg, Rockhampton. We also like Toowoomba a lot, a little bit west of Brisbane.
Yeah. I mean, South East Queensland, I mean, people can read this, but, there's already 75 plus billion infrastructure projects that are in the pipeline and in progress. Then you've got the 7 billion government commitment to the Olympics. I mean, this is a 10-year infrastructure program that's happening, and there's a creation of 91,000 plus jobs over the next 20 years. So, I mean, obviously it's a no-brainer there. Obviously, Sunny Coast for us, highest performing residential market. It's one of the highest performing markets in Australia. Very tightly held rental market. You've got a population which is going from around about that 380, 390 to 580 plus in a time which actually a lot less than that. That number there of 2041 has been drastically reduced in some recent data that we've looked at. And they're talking about a new suburb every year just to keep up with demand. And obviously we're not developing enough property to meet any of that demand. And so, interesting enough, I just read yesterday, SQM Research predicts Sunny Coast will grow by more than 12% over 2023. So, which is a little bit opposite of some of the stuff that we hear about in the media.
And a government report focused on South East Queensland, which was published this week, talking about how much land there is available, considered to be available by government for development, but identifying the fact that only actually about a third of that land is actually developable for various reasons, because there's covenants and constraints on so much of the land that more than well over half the undeveloped land is not actually available for development in South East Queensland, which is the population growth nerve centre of the nation.
And then you overlay that with the cost that we talked about for development in itself is just going to create further pressures. As we talk about infrastructure, people can obviously get access, if you want a copy of these slides, to mull over and read in your own leisure. Just please contact either Terry or ourselves at 000property.com.au or just Google 000 property. But look, large infrastructure projects are super important, and we see that, as we talked about, in South East Queensland, Wide Bay, Cairns, Townsville, Adelaide, and follow that infrastructure trail. A couple of case studies, and I just want to run through a couple of these just to give people what's been happening on the ground with our clients and what we're seeing. We actually have a package we've been able to secure for $745,000 this month. It's here on the Sunshine Coast. The land is registered and it's ready to go. We're achieving already $725 a week rent, or $725 already right now for similar properties. At completion, we see this compared with other properties that are at the moment that are like for like, same build, same design, around that 820, which is very similar to the numbers that we're talking about with HTW. 75,000 uplift straight away, 10% increase in value. Now, I'm a believer property is about the long term. It's not about just buy and make as much. I mean, great, we want uplift immediately, but we see that uplift there, which I guess gives certainty to our clients. And we're in an area there where there's massive undersupply and demand. Another one in Kalina Estate in Springfield. These are clients of ours, and actually came to us through yourself, Terry, and Stephen and Barbara. You probably have spoken to them on numerous occasions. Wonderful family, and we've been working with them. In January this year, we sourced a property for them in Springfield. The land registered in June, $610,000 package. Now, our plan was for this property to hold for the long term, but as all plans, things change. There was an opportunity came up. Even though we had a good yield there, we received a phone call off the builder's sign from someone in the area who wanted to purchase this property, or it was just ticked every box for them with what they were looking for. And we were able to negotiate off market for our client a $785,000 sale, which went unconditional literally within 24 hours. That's a 28% increase in 12 months. And this is in a market where Again, we're hearing doom and gloom. People aren't wanting to buy. This is a significant uplift. And the great thing here too is your capital gains tax. Yes, our clients are going to pay some capital gains, but it's only it's for 12. It's only a 50%. They get a 50% discount because they signed contracts back in January, and then they signed contracts in February, so greater than 12 months. And so they qualify for that 50% capital gains tax. Important for people to understand, it is actually from contract signing to contract signing, not from when you settle on the land and own that property. So big plus there. Adelaide, another area there for some clients in Gawler, in Everton Gardens there. The land is about to register where we secured this land. Again, the valuation of completion at 560. So again, a 50% immediate uplift and a really good, strong rental yield. And we actually believe those rents will continue to grow. By the time that house is complete, will be higher than that. Again, ticked all the boxes because of the area, the infrastructure in the area, the location, schools, shops, transport, and significant employment hubs within 15 minutes, 10, 15 minutes, and also immediately in that area. Looked at one in Cairns that we're looking at the moment, which we really like it from a yield perspective. Look, Townsville and Cairns, you can get some great yields by buying and developing and building the right property in the right place. What we like about this one, it's a dual key, a dual occupancy. And so from an affordability, you've got, I guess, two different tenants that come in, and it's affordable in an area where we're seeing increasing rents. And again, just close to the Cairns South State Development Area, which is creating thousands of new jobs. And it's an economy that is very strong. Townsville as well, very, very similar, as we've discussed. I do want to note, just got a little plug here, we're very big on making a difference in our community as well. And we've talked about this in our previous webinar. You can get some more information from there or contact us. But we also have the opportunity to do social housing and partnering with some of our builders and developers like Stockland in releasing land specifically for people with need. And we're just completing a couple of those properties, and they're already got leases in place, and we're talking long-term leases, which is a great way forward for some of our clients who just want that security and that knowledge that they're not only making a difference, but they've got long-term tenancies in place. Before I go any further, did you want any comments, Terry, on any further commentary on areas? I'm sure there'll be people who have questions, and we'll probably cover that off in our Q&A.
Yeah, I mean, there's some questions coming in about what about Perth, for example. I mean, we can't sort of cover in detail every location in the country in a 1 hour broadcast. We're just presenting some of the possibilities, but certainly Perth is a market that's one of the strongest in the country at the moment. There's getting a lot of investor demand there. It's the most affordable capital city in terms of the median price for houses at the moment. Very low vacancies. The Western Australian economy is strong and growing, and so there's good possibilities in Perth and also in regional Western Australia and some of the major regional centres, not the mining centres. Adelaide, we've talked about. Regional South Australia has growth outside of Adelaide as well. There's growth prospects right around the country. Darwin never gets talked about. And it's a market that's very, very solid at the moment with good, strong sales activity and the highest rental yields in capital city Australia. So there are other possibilities, but we're just presenting some of the options here today.
100%. And for those who want that to get into the nitty gritty, just get in touch with us, and we're happy to have that. So we talk about building. This slide's been up there for a little while. You all can read that, but really it's more important than ever to have the right builder. Again, I just heard a report of another major builder going into administration yesterday, which is going to have a significant impact on, unfortunately, many families. So for us, we're very careful with who we work with. Make sure you know your builder. Make sure you know their financials, their quality, how long they've been in place, understand their build footprint. Important to know what is and what is not included That's what we do at 000. That's what we do, and we manage that process to ensure the best way forward for our clients. And before we go into our Q&A, I just really want to talk about, I love quotes, and Warren Buffett said, someone sitting in the shade today because someone planted a tree a long time ago. And look, I think property investing is very similar. I think a solid investment strategy should be as interesting as watching grass grow, or a tree, as this analogy. It's a long-term investment. You don't plant it today and expect shade tomorrow. And if you plant the right seeds in the right conditions, time will work its magic and you'll actually have a tree. If the tree isn't growing, digging it up and moving is really the solution. And it's the same with investing. There's no quick fix when it comes to building and growing your wealth over time. It's about planning, but importantly, it's also about doing. And we notice a lot of people like to talk and attend lots of webinars and gather lots of information and resources, but actually never move forward. I talk about being positive, proactive, and responsible. If we have a negative mindset and we just focus on the negatives, you're not going to move forward. You've got to be proactive. The opposite of being proactive is being inactive, sitting still. But we also got to take responsibility. We can't change what we've missed out on or what's happened in our past, but what we do today determines our future and where we go. So maybe also like that quote from Warren Buffett, although I don't adhere to greed, but he says, when everyone else is greedy, be fearful, and when everyone is fearful, it's time to be greedy. And I think be counter-cyclical in the way that you operate. And certainly right now, I had a meeting, which was talking offline before, with my financier, looking at how what I can do in wanting to buy another project every year, like to continue to add to my portfolio. And we're looking at that now. But Q&A time, and then we can go in and just finish off. Terry, you've got some questions there, no doubt.
Yes, I encourage everybody watching and listening to give us your questions. Type them into the chat box or the Q&A panel. Either will do. They will show up, and we'll get through as many of your questions or comments as we can in the time that we have left. So don't waste that opportunity. Now, Dallas is just asking if you can get a copy of the presentation. Everybody who has registered for this event, and I assume you're watching today, assume that would indicate that you have registered for this webinar. Everyone who's registered will receive a copy of the presentation. So that goes out to everybody. Not everyone who registered is able to watch live, so we do send out a copy of the presentation in the next 24 hours or so to everyone who did register.
And Dallas, if you want a copy of the slides, just contact us at invest@000property, all one word, in all words, 000.com.au, and we'll send you a copy of the slides, or just jump onto our website. If you just Google 000 property, doesn't matter if you put the numbers in or not, 000 property, you jump on our website, fill in the form, and we'll send you the slides. Just make sure you mention the hotspotting Terry Ryder, so we know where you've come from.
Okay. All right. Now, anonymous attendee, curious why no mention of WA in terms of structure. We did subsequently, I think, touch on Perth and Western Australia. As I mentioned, I think Perth is one of the strongest and most popular markets for investors at the moment for a variety of good reasons. And there are locations outside of Perth as well. Not a lot, but because we are very cautious about regional markets that are fundamentally about the resources sector, because they're very volatile and high risk. But there are more well-rounded economies in regional Western Australia, such as Mandurah, which has been a very strong market for the past 2 or 3 years and still getting good demand. Bunbury is in a good space at the moment, and Geraldton's another that's really starting to come into its own. So those are 3 major regional centres in Western Australia that have solid economies, growing populations, and they offer affordability as well.
Interesting comment there from another anonymous attendee about the quality of the properties that are on the market. And perhaps the price drop is partly due to the quality of those properties. Not really sure I can answer that question. I don't. I think sometimes there are circumstances why people do put properties on the market, and it could be changing circumstances, which is out of their control, or fear. But price drops due to quality. I'm sure that during the hype and the FOMO, there are people who were buying without really doing their due diligence. And there was always a risk. And again, if you go back to previous webinars that we've held, we talk about that. Now even then we say you've got to be really careful with what you buy. You don't just buy anything, because you can buy the wrong sort of property or the wrong type of property. And I think perhaps that could be an issue there. I'm not sure what your views are.
Well, I think I'm not sure if this is what the questioner is driving at, but as a generalisation around the country, the really top end properties are the ones that have come off the most in terms of price. The locations that were paying absolutely top dollar, including some of the very high profile iconic regional locations like Byron Bay, for example, where the price growth was just insane for a couple of years, and that's come back quite a bit. So what we are seeing around the country, and again, it's a generalisation and it's different from one market to the next, but in markets that have dropped a lot, including Sydney, it's mostly the top end that's dropped the most, and the more affordable areas are still getting strong demand, because this is a market in which people are chasing affordability, and the interest rate environment dictates that more and more, that people are looking for value for money in those lower price ranges. So we're still actually seeing good buyer demand in major cities where the median price may have dropped, giving the appearance that the market overall has dropped, but in actual fact, in the cheaper price ranges, demand and pricing is holding up pretty well.
That's a really, really good point. And just to go on about median price, how is it that we just see this constant change? How do they measure the median price in a suburb? Because it can be very confusing. I live in an area which has waterfront properties. It has properties that aren't waterfront. It has older properties that are knockdowns. And one month you may have a number of properties that are sold for a very high price because of their position in that suburb, as opposed to, just down the road up, where they're on a dry block, which is a knockdown. And that can have a big difference in the fluctuation of that median price for that suburb.
Yeah, median prices are kind of used and abused in media quite a bit, and misunderstood, I think. A 10% rise in the median price doesn't mean values across the region are rising 10%, nor does a 10% drop in median price mean that values are falling 10% across the board. It can merely reflect the type of properties that are being bought or sold in a particular time span. But the median price is simply, if you list all the sales in an area in a month, from the highest to the lowest, the median price is the one in the middle of the list. That's all. And if there's a lot of top end properties sold at a particular point in time, that would tend to lift the median price. And if we're in a market where more people are buying at the lower end of the market, that would tend to bring down the median price. So that's the kind of market we're in at the moment. And so it's giving the impression that values are falling in Sydney, according to the core logic figures, more than 10% in the last 12 months. But that doesn't mean values, the median price has dropped that much. It doesn't mean values across the board are falling 10% in Sydney. There are still parts of Sydney where values are actually rising.
Oh, absolutely. And
so that's something that needs to be kept in mind. Gary's asking, do you guys have a rental yield percent you use around the country as a guide to determine value and assess a proposed investment property is priced right? Look, I mean, I'll let you comment on this, Danny, but I think in commercial property, the yield tends to dictate the value, the sale price, a lot more than is the case in residential property. Would you agree with that?
100%. Commercials looked at very differently, and when you do a commercial valuation, if you do that from a valuer's perspective, it's all yield focused, and that then determines what that property is worth. And again, depending on what's happening in the market, will determine what percentage they're going to be looking at from where they dictate the value. For residential property, obviously getting that balance between growth and yield is always a challenge. And if you've got someone who's very growth focused and really chasing that aggressive growth, you may forego a little bit of yield to get that. I think we are in an interesting time right now where we are seeing growth and yield both working together.
Yeah.
It creates a really unique opportunity, and hence why I think there's that opportunity and a resurgence for smart, astute investors. For us, we always, rule of thumb, we always try to get around about $1 per thousand if we can. So around about that 5.2% yield. And if we're getting around about a 5% yield for us, it creates the opportunity where there's the affordability factor for our client from investment and holding that property. But be careful you're not just chasing yields, because you can go into an area that might be promoting yields, but and we saw that in the resources where people were in resource towns, mining towns, were chasing really big yields. And then when they did look at all those other factors, which we talked about with long-term infrastructure, multiple jobs, scenarios, and the like. So, but around about 5% is where we like to see.
And the question from Elizabeth kind of speaks to what you've just said. I think she's asking the high rental areas like Darwin and Cairns. Townsville also put in their list as a city where you can get very good rental returns on houses. Are they also high capital growth areas? And you've just alluded to that. Buying in the right places, I think you can have a nice mixture of both. You can get a good, strong rental return to compensate for higher interest rates, and also be in an area that's got the credentials for capital growth. Yes, I'll let you comment on that a little bit further, Danny.
Well, again, it's just buying smart and being very careful with where you buy, and not just buying with your head, and building having the right people around you to make that right decision, because you can buy with yield and get the good yield and get the growth as well. Your growth might not be as aggressive in where it's going. And I do think a place like Cairns and Townsville, you're going to be buying, as long as you're buying and it stacks up from a valuation perspective, I think you can be very comfortable that it's a good investment, particularly if you're getting those sort of yields, and will continue to grow over time. Going back to that analogy about the tree though, property investing is long-term. If you buy smart and you buy right, you will get good long-term property growth in that property over time.
Yeah. I also want to introduce another factor for people to consider when they're thinking about yield. I think, don't just think about what the yield is. If you're buying today, it might be a 5.5% yield, which is pretty healthy. Think about what it might be in, say, 2 years' time, because we're in an environment where vacancy rates are incredibly low and rents are rising strongly with no remedy to the shortage in sight. And so there's a very good prospect that if you're buying a property now with a 5.5% gross rental return, in a couple of years' time, it might be above 7% based on what you paid for that property. So keep that in mind, that you might, it might be just barely breaking even now, but in a couple of years' time, it will be probably positive cash flow, with the added prospect that probably in a couple of years' time, interest rates will have come down again.
Yeah, look, we're getting great. We've certainly, that's been experienced for all of our clients where, we will say, hey, based on today's market, particularly if we're building, we can only say this is what it's going to rent for, because we don't have the full crystal ball. We know, and we're pretty confident where things are going, but if we work on where today's figures are, knowing, and often by the time, for example, that example in Springfield, our rental appraisal initially was around, $595, or actually $575 off memory. So to be able to then achieve that 650 is or would have been a great result. Certainly our clients, Gympie is an area where we see opportunity, and we're seeing clients also where initially we're looking back in the day around that 450 to 500 a week rent, 525, and now getting 600, 625 a week rent. So the yields are far in excess of what they achieve, plus they've got the growth. So it's very important that you take all that into play. Again, be careful you're not buying though with your emotion and what you like. You buy to make money, and both of us have property that it's not necessarily what I like or where I want to live, but it's where other people are happy to live and where I'm going to get a good return, I'm going to get that growth, and it ticks the box for me.
And just continuing the discussion about rents and rental yields, Rob was asking, what's the best way to get a rental appraisal?
Yeah, talk to a really good local agent, and depending where you are, we can certainly put you in touch with those. We do that here. We do our research. You can look at RP data, and you can get information there where you can access, or even just doing a realestate.com and go on and you can look at what has rented, and it gives you a bit of an idea, or what's sitting there for rent and how long it's been on the market will give you a good idea. But talk to a really good agent who's got their hands on the ground, who's working for you. We do see there are some property managers out there who, it's just, they're quoting above market rents just to get someone into their rent roll, and then they'll sell that rent roll down the track because there's value in a rent roll. Just make sure you're working with a property manager that understands investors, has an investor mindset. It's not just they're propping up their sales or their real estate business.
Yeah, I think, a good property manager, and I do stress a good one. When I buy, I always use a representative, a buyer's agent, and they usually have contacts that they know and trust, and a property manager that will not only give you a rental appraisal, but also give you an assessment about is this a good property investment? Would it be readily rentable? Do you see problems? A good property manager would say, like, I wouldn't touch this with a barge pole for X, Y, Z reasons, rather than try and just grab another, because they don't want a bad property in their portfolio as property managers either. So, property managers with local knowledge is probably the best way to go.
And that's what we do. Part of our research is on the ground talking to local agents. Now, when we went to Adelaide, it wasn't just looking at the data and information, but being on the ground, physically there, having those conversations and understanding the challenge. And also that helps you make sure you've got the right design to maximise your rental return.
Yeah, and we've just come up to the hour, so it might be time to start wrapping up. You got some final thoughts to leave people with before we...
Yeah, look, obviously that slide that is up there is obviously the right process for success hasn't changed and doesn't change and should never change. It's about getting all those ducks in a row, as we say. In every presentation I do, this slide is there, and it's there for a reason. Start with the end in mind. Know what it is you're wanting to achieve. You don't hop into a taxi and just say drive. You need to have a destination, a goal, and a purpose of why you're doing this. The goal and purpose, because that helps push you and keeps you focused on what you're wanting to do. You've got to have the right mindset, which I talked about. You're building your team, whether it be from a financier, legal, utilising ourselves as a building broker, buyer's agent. Get yourself market ready. So when the opportunity is there, you do something. And I talk about do. We do listen to a lot of people, and we talk to a lot of people who go, yeah, I want to do this, I want to do that, but maybe next year or maybe the year after that, or we have a lot of conversation but never actually do something. And time again, we end up having that conversation 2 years down the track with them. And a lot of them say, why didn't you push me? Why didn't you force me to do something? I can't force you to do anything. It's completely your decision. We're just there to hold your hand and guide you and protect you along the way and give you the information so you can make the right decision. So you've got to buy smart and future-proof that investment, build your team, build your portfolio at the same time. Okay. A big part of that is getting those reports from Terry, which obviously leads on to our next slide there, which you can see. Sorry, there you go. Which is our special offer there. Get in touch with us at 000 Property, and you can just get on the website, just Google us or contact us, and we'll organise a free obligation, no obligation consultation. So just understand what it is you're trying to do, point you in the right direction. If we can help you, great. If not, great. We're happy to at least give you some resources so you can make the right decision. We're here to help. We also have a special offer too, where if someone does utilise our services and we're able to build and help you build your wealth through property, And we also want to gift you a 12-month subscription to Terry Ryder's Hotspotting Premium Gold membership, which is valued up to $2,000. A number of our clients who've come on board have really enjoyed this and utilised this. And even if you don't use us, subscribe to Terry's. You're not paying me to do this, Terry, but they are very worthwhile and a source of great information.
Thank you, Danny. And easiest way, if anybody wants to follow up and get in touch with you, there you go.
There you go. Invest at triple0property.com.au. Even if you just Google 000 property, our website should pop up. Or just give us a call on that 1300 897, which is TZP 000 property 000.
Okay, jot down those contact details, either the phone number or the email address. I think the most important thing that you said in the entire presentation, Danny, was investing in building a team. I think that's the thing that too many investors neglect. Willing to invest in real estate, but I think before you do that, you've got to be willing to invest some time and money in building a team and getting the right advice and the right information. And if you do that, you're more likely to get a good result, the result that you're looking for, which is an investment property that ticks all your boxes and grows in wealth. Thanks for a great presentation, Danny. And we'll do it again soon, I hope.
No, absolutely. Look, we just love to work with clients. We love the fact that many of our clients come back again and again and again because we're getting the results. But thank you for everyone for listening. Thank you, Terry, for the opportunity to talk, and I look forward to continuing these conversations and discussions in the future, and excited to see what we're going to be talking about in 6 months from now. Yeah, well, hopefully our forecast that this is a year of opportunity in a time of market resurgence will be borne out by that time. I think it will be. Okay, everyone, thanks for participating. Thank you, Danny Buxton from 000. Bye for now. Thank you.